Our next storyteller is Zach Matheson. Zach has actually been storytelling with us since the very beginning, 3 years ago. And he is very excited to go to work in the Middle East. But recently, a routine checkup landed him with a pretty serious psychological diagnosis. And he has to fight for not only his spot on the trip, but for his sanity. Here is Zach with I'm Not a Doctor.
So I was going to say that this story is about finding your voice, but it's also kind of about being present. And how sometimes it takes the threat of losing something that you care deeply about to remember that you have a voice. So I am a weekend warrior, literally. I mean, every month I go up to my unit in Lakeport to drill with the National Guard. And I've been doing this for 2 years, and it's a really rewarding experience. Especially just doing the work at the end of the day, like actually having something that you've constructed instead of having mounds of paperwork. And getting to know the people in my unit who come from all across the state and from all different backgrounds. And a couple months ago, I learned that I was getting deployed, or as I like to put it, I'm going on an all-expenses-paid desert vacation to the Middle East, courtesy of Uncle Sam. And to be honest, I'm really excited about it. But it almost didn't happen. So, but what happened was, I've always suffered from, and I don't want to call it depression because I'm not a doctor, but let's just say blues music. There's a reason it's my favorite genre. And another thing, twice in my life, I've had these like up moments, which are really hard to describe. But I think Nina Simone actually put it best when she said, I'm feeling good. Like, birds flying high, you know how I feel. Sun in the sky, you know how I feel. Breeze drifting on by, you know how I feel. It's a new dawn, it's a new day, it's a new life, and I'm feeling good. So I figured I should get that checked out. So I go to see a psychiatrist. When I think of psychiatrist, I think of like older, Austrianer, beardier, with a pipe or something. So I was a little taken aback when I walk into this psychiatrist's office, and it's like a young person. She's like my age. But anyway, we sit down and she asks me, what brings you in? And I tell her about my life, and I tell her about my downs, and I tell her about my ups. And then I'm kind of hoping that she tells me what I am, what's up with me. But instead, she's just like, Zach, I don't really know what to diagnose you, if anything. What would you like to do? And I'm like, what would I want to do? I thought that was kind of funky. But so we talk a little more, and at the end of the session, I walk out with a prescription, and I walk out with a newfound sense of empowerment that I've sort of taken the first steps in 29 years towards fortifying my mental health and preparing for this big trip. But the next day, when I tell this story to my good friend Pat, who also happens to be a really good psychologist, and who's normally this really friendly, super non-judgmental guy, he's always just oh, hey, Zach, what's up? how was your day? What'd you eat last night? Oh, that's awesome. You get the idea. So when I tell him my story that I got a prescription for lithium, and he's like, lithium? Zach, that's a serious drug. And it's prescribed for bipolar. I was feeling a little less empowered. And I'm like, but I assure him, like, no, she didn't give me a diagnosis. She didn't know what to call me. And so we were just kind of like trying this out. And he's like, Zach, you don't try lithium out. And you can't get a prescription without first getting a diagnosis. And he thinks for a second. And he's like, also, do you think you'd be able to deploy with such a serious diagnosis? So I needed to get to the bottom of this. The first person I call is obviously the psychiatrist, who's busy. So the second person I call is the behavioral psych officer for my unit. She's in charge of all things psych-related. And so if anyone would know if there were any like diagnoses that would bar you from getting deployed, it's her. And I met her in like a training exercise a few months prior, and she's super nice and super approachable. And we have sort of a rapport, so I felt comfortable approaching her. And so I call her and I ask her just, hey, are there any kind of like diagnoses that would keep me from deploying? And she's like, yeah, but like, psychosis, schizophrenia, bipolar, just like the serious ones. Why do you ask? No reason, ma'am. Thank you. Because at that point, I wasn't sure that I had a diagnosis, right? So as soon as I can, I talk to my psychiatrist, and I just ask her, I know we talked about different diagnoses, and I know you weren't like really sure, but you did prescribe me, so I just want to make sure that you didn't diagnose me with anything, right? And she is like, of course I gave you a diagnosis. Bipolar. I prescribed you lithium. And so my heart just like drops. But I have an idea. I'm like, so, okay. Clearly this is a big misunderstanding. What say we take a step back, you uncheck that bipolar box, and we just start fresh. And she is like, no, this diagnosis is final. And no matter how hard I try and convince her, she will not budge. And so, except for the part where I tell her, like, I don't care if you won't overturn my diagnosis because I won't accept your treatment anyway, except for that part, the rest of the appointment went real smooth. But I knew I didn't really even need her anyway. Okay, I knew this because the psych officer had always been in my corner. So I knew she'd be able to figure things out. I give her a call and I tell her the whole story, how like I received this diagnosis. This psych had blindsided me with this diagnosis, and what can we do to fix this problem? And she's like, her tone changes, and she's like, actually, if you really do have this diagnosis, I'm obligated to tell your commander. So at this point, I'm freaking out. I just can't stop thinking about how excited I was to travel the world, how excited I was to get to know my fellow soldiers better, how excited I was to participate in this ritual, which, for better or for worse, has been with us for as long as humans have been around. But I had one last chance to turn it all around. Because before I had hung up on the psychiatrist, she had found it somehow in her heart. I don't know, by the grace of God or Allah or the flying spaghetti monster, or whoever was looking out for me that day. At the end of the conversation, she's like, here's this number, give him a call. he can set you up with another psychiatrist to give you a second opinion. So you better believe that I took that opportunity, and I prepared for that second opinion like I was going to court. I considered all the arguments, I considered all the angles, and I was like, okay, I am going to convince this psychiatrist whose job it is to give people diagnoses day in and day out that this diagnosis of mine is wrong. So I sit down with him, and he's like, what brings you in? And I tell him, here's the deal. I met with this first psychiatrist, and I'm sure she's a fine clinician and a fine person, but we all make mistakes. And I think she made a mistake. Not about my diagnosis, mind you. I'm not a doctor, that's for you to decide. But just about how quickly she gave it to me, how sort of just nonchalant it was. How could you put something so heavy on someone so fast? I just need us to take a little more time in figuring this out. And he was like, mm-hmm. And then he proceeded to ask me questions, and so I told him about my life, and I told him about my downs, and I told him about my ups. But then he asked me a really interesting question. He asked me, you talk about these two ups, what happens just before? And I thought about it, and I realized something. So these two ups happened, one after I got straight A's last semester of college, one after the first story I ever told on stage. And you might be saying to yourself, well, I got straight A's, and I didn't feel like I was the sun, or the breeze, or the birds. Fair enough. However, this small accomplishment was actually massive for me. For 16 years, I had coasted in school, and suddenly I found myself really down, feeling like I would never amount to anything, and I needed to do something about it. So I made a small vow to myself to get straight A's this last semester, and it was terrifying. I was gonna have to read the books and participate in class and turn in my assignments on time. But I just persevered, and I asked questions, and I formed study groups, and by the end of the semester, people were coming to me for answers. And what happened was I just found my niche. I found my voice. And the same thing was true with the storytelling. I was terrified of getting up on stage, but I wanted to do it anyway. And I practiced way too hard. And then I got up on stage, and I told a story that I was proud of, and people laughed, and people came up afterwards and said it reminded them of this or that. And I found my voice. And so what I realized in this moment with this second psychiatrist was that sometimes it's really easy to forget that life is not happening to you. It's happening with you, and that you need to get engaged. And so sometimes, though, it's hard because you're surrounded by people who know a lot more than you it seems, about you. But the truth is that no one knows more about me than me. So what happened in that meeting was I didn't really convince the psychiatrist of anything other than the fact that I have a voice. And so we talked, and in the end, I asked him, do you think maybe you could uncheck that box? And he was like, yeah, I'll uncheck the box. And we scaled the diagnosis back, and we scaled the treatment back. But the point is, and that was a huge relief, right? A huge weight off my shoulders. But more importantly, I realized that you always need to find your voice, no matter what the situation is. So part of the reason why I'm really excited to deploy is because my day job is as a psych researcher studying PTSD. And I'm actually to have this opportunity to collect data while I'm over there to conduct this study. So in the midst of all this stress and war and possibly death, I'm hoping to bring back information that will hopefully breathe new life into veterans, into people suffering from stress-related disorders, and back into our community. And I'm also hoping to develop my singing voice. Thank you.